Oh my god, it's like going. Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be telling you all of the books that I have read so far this year, what I am currently reading, as well as what I plan to read for the rest of this summer. I haven't done a wrap up at all this year, so we're going to be starting with the last book that I read in 2021 and working our way all the way up to now. Let's just jump right into it. So, the last book that I read in 2021 is Dark Tales by Shirley Jackson. This is a collection of short horror stories which I started in October, and I loved it. I got this because the introduction to this edition was written by Ottessa Moshfegh, who is my favorite author. These stories do bear a kind of resemblance to hers, except for they are horror, of course, but I didn't find them to be scary, really. I found them to be, delightfully horrifying. Like, you'd get to a certain point in the story where you realize how the main character was going to die, and you'd just be like, oh, that's wonderful. That's so smart how she did that. Then, the first book that I read in 2022 was Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong. This is a poetry collection. It's mostly about his relationship with his parents and his identity, and Vuong just has an insane grasp of language. Like, every single word in these poems is piercing and multidimensional. It's just really moving, beautiful, and really transformative. I honestly cannot remember the last time I read a poetry collection that just, shattered me like this. Then I read Euripides 2. This is a collection of plays which includes The Cyclops, Heracles, Iphigenia in Taurus, and Helen. They're fine. I wasn't really crazy about any of these translations, except for Iphigenia in Taurus is really exciting. Although structurally, this Iphigenia in Taurus has the same structure as Helen. It's just this one is significantly better. I didn't finish The Cyclops. I think that one's supposed to be a comedy. I prefer Seneca's version of the Heracles myth, Hercules Furens. Then I read Love by Toni Morrison. I'm continuing on my quest to read all of Toni Morrison's books. After this, all I have to read are Tar Baby and The Bluest Eye. This is about a man named Bill Cozy. He owns a beachside hotel, and it really follows the many women in town who are in love with him, and the ways that he affects them and controls them years after his death. This is brilliant in all of the ways that Toni Morrison's books are brilliant. She has a really great command of atmosphere and character, and she just knows how to tell a good story. But I honestly wasn't super into this one. I think it's clear that not all of her books are written about situations which appeal to me in my current phase of life. I'm 20 years old. I don't know. This one just didn't grip me, but I do have a feeling that I could return to this in a few decades and see it in a whole new light. Then I read You Are Having a Good Time by Amy Barradale. This is a short story collection, which I read because I saw it on a list of Ottessa Moshfegh's favorite books. You might be noticing a pattern. I'm just desperate for more Ottessa Moshfegh, so I'm working my way through all of the authors that she admires. I feel like whenever Amy Barradale comes to a crossroads as a writer, she thinks what is the most unhinged direction that this story could go? And then she just goes that way, full throttle. It's a lot like Homesick for Another World by Ottessa Moshfegh in a very fresh way. Highly recommend this one. And then, who is this by? I have a book by Ottessa Moshfegh called My New Novel. I bet you haven't seen this one. I hadn't heard of it, but I found it because I was listening to a podcast interview with Ottessa Moshfegh where she said that she was on the cover of Vogue Italy. And I was like, why? So I went and I Googled the Vogue article, and it turns out that Ottessa Moshfegh had teamed up with Gagosian Art Galleries, which is a gallery in New York City, and they are doing a project where they pair contemporary American writers with contemporary artists for a series called Picture Books, where the writers write a short story, and then an artist is tasked with creating a poster to go along with that story. So here I have my new novel, but on the other side we have The Down Payment by Issy Wood, which is a painting that goes along with the story. This cost $40, but I got it because this is the only way that you can read this story, and Ottessa Moshfegh is my favorite writer. I want to read all of her stuff, and it's a really good story, and it comes in this really cool bind-up. So I'm glad that I own it, even though I don't like the painting that comes with it at all. I've looked up Issy Wood's other paintings, and I actually really like her work. I think that it's really dark and atmospheric and cool. But this painting is just I think it's ugly. I don't want to hang it up anywhere in my house. Just this, like, ugly crying man being swarmed by chipmunks. I don't like it. But I like the book. I think it's a nice item. So there. I've reviewed the secret Otessa Moshfegh book that nobody knows about. My new novel. Then I have a big one. Like, figuratively and literally, it's just enormous. And that is To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. It's by one of my favorite authors. Hanya Yanagihara wrote The People in the Trees and A Little Life, which are two of my all-time favorites. I've recently realized I think I like The People in the Trees more than A Little Life. I think it's better structured, it's kind of stuck with me more. But maybe that's because I've read it more recently. But anyway, To Paradise is her third book, and it is nothing like the others. I think it's so cool how every time she just completely reinvents herself. So this book is about 3 alternate versions of America in 3 alternate centuries. First up, I noted how, like, each section of the book has a different literary style. Like, the first section of the book, she has said that she modeled it after the works of Henry James. I haven't read any Henry James, but I found it to be very, like, Dickensian, Jane Austen-y. It's like a cool period romance. Except for this is an alternate version of America in which the northern United States were founded on the principle of free love. So it's a gay romance in 1893. And I just have to admire Hanya Yanagihara's, like, absolute refusal to write about straight people. I think it's extremely funny, and it's something that I would want to unpack on a deeper level if her books weren't, like, so good. Like, if she was writing terrible gay books, then I'd be like, okay, what's your deal? But, like, they're consistently really excellent, so I'll just take them. She says a lot in interviews that she's not interested in writing about, like, gender or, like, societal oppression, and I think that by writing about men, she sees that as a way of, like, escaping a lot of societal limitations. But she also says that she likes writing about men because of all of the social limitations. There's, like, things that men can't say to one another. But anyway, there's a really sweet romance in the first book. It's an interesting kind of, like, gay period novel about, like, a rich man who falls in love with a poor man, and his family is like, no, he's gonna steal all of your money, and he's like, I don't wanna, but Daddy, I love him. And it's an interesting way of setting up what this book is really about, which is, like, what is paradise in America? Like, who gets to go there? Who is kept out? And what does it mean for different people? Could you be living in a quote-unquote utopia, but need to escape somewhere in order to love the person that you want to? So that's part 1. I'm not gonna, like, spoil each section. I'm just gonna give you, like, an idea of what each one is about. Part 2 is in 2 sections. There's a young man living in New York City, and then the part that is narrated by his father. And this young man is the would-be king of Hawaii if the United States hadn't overthrown the monarchy and colonized the island. And this book asks, like, is paradise something that has been destroyed? Can it be recreated? Section 2 is kind of strange, and it was around this point in the book that I was just really wondering, like, what was the point of this, like, weird structure? Like, what exactly is she grappling with? And then part 3 came along, and this is the longest section of this book, and it's set in the future. And it's about, like, an America that is slowly transformed over the course of several decades as, like, waves of pandemics tear the country apart, and what decisions the government has to make in order to contain that pandemic. And it asks, like, is the country that we are creating in the name of safety worth living in? And it's important to note that that section was written before our current pandemic, like, happened. She had already planned out the entirety of this novel. Part 3 is really slow, but I just stuck it out, and it got really good during the last, like, 200 pages. And I often find that's how Hanya Yanagihara's books go. Like, you have to give her a lot of trust, but if you wait for her books to, like, really take off, they will stay with you forever. I feel like I could have had just, like, the most beautiful review of that written out if I just filmed a video about it when I read it. But it's been a long semester. After that, I read The Seagull by Anton Chekhov. This is a play, which some of my peers were doing in an acting class, so I read the play so that I could understand the scenes they were doing. It's a good play. It's about a group of people living at a lakeside house for the summer. Just very, like tense and repressed, lots of subtext, lots of meaty characters for actors to dig into. I bet this would be great to watch on stage. It's a good read. Next, I read A Book of Common Prayer by Joan Didion. This is the only Joan Didion book that I have read so far this year. It is fiction, and it is told from the perspective of a woman with a significant political influence over the fictional Latin American country Boca Grande. And it follows her observations of another woman who comes to this country hoping to be reunited with her fugitive daughter. It follows these women's interpersonal struggle while also outlining the political struggle in the country, and it documents the developing revolution. Didion's experience as a journalist definitely shapes this book. Even though this country is fake, its struggles feel very real and its figures feel like real people. And so even though the writing can feel kind of detached and analytical, it's still extremely urgent. The prose is pretty sparse. Joan Didion offers vital information kind of sparingly, and she does not like to repeat herself, so it at times was very difficult for me to follow. But her prose is just so beautiful and powerful that even without knowing like every single thing that was going on all the time, I still feel like I got a lot out of it. I always do with her books. Next, I read A Doll's House Part 2 by Lucas Nath. This is a play which is a sequel to the old play A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, which is famous for its ending where a mother leaves her husband and children to start a life on her own. This play picks up 15 years later when she comes back. And I loved this. Lucas Nath's writing is really funny and sharp, and the words speak well. I had to do a scene from this in my acting class, and it's just very easy to act, and there's just a lot of material to dig into. I would love to see it on stage. I've read a lot of plays lately, so you're going to hear that a lot. Just like, oh, I would love to see this. But they're all great to read as well. Then I read Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. Godot. I was in a scene from this, weeks after I read it, actually, just for a separate class. But in that scene, we pronounced it Godot, but everyone I talk to about the play says, yeah, Godot. So I'm going to say Waiting for Godot. This is a classic piece of absurdist existentialist theater. It's about two men who are waiting for Godot. That's the play. They're just standing around. They say, Godot's going to come, so we can't leave because he's going to come. Does he? You'll have to wait and see. I'm a really big fan of Samuel Beckett's play Happy Days, which is about a woman at the beach who is sinking into the ground, but she keeps telling everyone what a great day she's having. His plays are very absurd and existentialist, you might say. And they have really striking images, and they play with words in a really fun way, so it's nice to hear them spoken aloud. I haven't gotten to see Godot on stage, but I've gotten to speak it myself, and it's very fun. Then I read Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. So I have read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and I loved that, and I loved this. It follows a Chinese-American family living in the 70s as they grapple with their teenage daughter's death and disappearance. I read both of her books at times when I was just too busy to really dig into them. I read Little Fires Everywhere when I was in the middle of moving across the country, and then I read this during finals week. So, they're great books. I can't really say much beyond that. My phone just ran out of space and I had to delete a bunch of videos, so I'm gonna be fast with the rest of these. Okay, we have Felicity by Mary Oliver. These poems are about love. They're great. I'm gonna read one for you. I'll find one of the ones that I saved. This poem is called Storage. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened, not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like the little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things! Burn them! Burn them! Make a beautiful fire! More room in your heart for love, for the trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly. Then I finally read Just Us, An American Conversation by Claudia Rankine. Citizen by Claudia Rankine was one of my favorite books of 2020, and I finally found a copy of this. Claudia Rankine is a professor of poetry and race studies at Yale. She writes poems as well as essays about America. This book in particular tackles the idea that what is wrong with America today is that we are incapable of having these bipartisan conversations about race. And she really puts that to the test. She travels a lot, and there are huge sections of this book where she's at like an airport and she is sitting next to a white man and she will ask him, how do you conceptualize your whiteness? How would you describe your privilege in your own words? And she just kind of points out that when it comes to race and privilege in America, people already know what they believe about it. People already know the truth of it, really. And there is a truth that a lot of white people just don't want to acknowledge. It's not that they're not having conversations about it, and it's not that nobody's asking them about it. They know the truth about racism in America, the part that they play in it, and how they benefit from it. They are just unwilling to acknowledge that. Rankine's books are very powerful, beautifully written, and I think that they should just be mandatory reading for everyone living in America, Citizen especially. Then I read Department of Speculation by Jenny Offal. So it's just about a woman who is married and has a child, and that's kind of all the information it gives you. It's just these like sparse little paragraphs where you are given like a fleeting thought of hers in her life. It kind of intentionally doesn't have a plot or a story, and the snippets are nicely written. They're like nice little thoughts that just kind of breeze past you. It's a very breezy book. I breezed through it in one afternoon, and it left no impression on me. I'm never going to think about it again, because it does nothing. That's rude. I mean, she's a very popular writer, and I think there's a reason for that. This is very much like a book for people on the go. If you like want to be up to date on all the cool novels, and you're like, Jenny Offal, I've heard that name, and you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to read one of the big books, and you can just kind of like read these little fleeting paragraphs and think, that's nice, and then you can put it down and not really think about it. But hey, the last time you picked it up, you breezed through 50 pages at once, so why don't you pick it up again? And then you get to the end of it, and you get to tell yourself, I read a book. I'm getting so worked up over this. I liked it fine. I gave it 3 stars. It's fine. If you want to read a book about a woman who is unhappily married and has a child, read Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. It's also kind of sparsely written. It's got the same kind of sardonic sense of humor. But that book has an aesthetic, a point, character. Then I read Absolutely on Music, Conversations with Seiji Ozawa by Haruki Murakami. So, Haruki Murakami is a novelist. I have only read 1/3 of his book 1Q84, and I put that down like 2 years ago now. I liked it fine. But this is nonfiction because he is a huge classical music fan, and he is friends with Seiji Ozawa, who was the conductor for the Boston Symphony for 20 years. He's just a very famous conductor. And they talk about music. Each chapter kind of follows them listening to different recordings of different pieces, discussing what the composer did, what the performers in those recordings did, and the differences. And it's just really cool to hear them compare. They talk about like 6 different recordings of Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto, and they talk about this one fantastic performance at Carnegie Hall conducted by Leonard Bernstein with Glenn Gould playing the piano. And before the show, Bernstein came out and he was like, just so you all know, this is not my interpretation of this piece, but I respect Gould as an artist, so I am going to let him do this, but I wanted to give you a warning. This is not how I would have this piece done. And then there's another recording of Gould playing the Beethoven Third Piano Concerto, but with the Berlin Philharmonic, which is just this very like staunch Germanic sound. They're very like straightforward. And then Glenn Gould was very like freeform and jazzy. And so you have this very like rigid Germanic sound, and then Glenn Gould is playing like Beethoven, like it's jazz, and it's like they're fighting with each other. And it's a really brilliant recording, and I wouldn't have gotten all of those elements of the performance if I hadn't read this book. I don't think they would have registered in my mind. So that's very cool that they're able to do that, because I like classical music. I'm an opera singer, but it's hard for me to get into recordings because I really think that it's a style of music that was written to be heard live so that you can see the performers in the space, you can hear the sound being affected by the room around you. And I think that reading this book and getting that kind of perspective on the music allowed me to access those recordings in ways that I haven't been able to before. And that really awakened this taste in me for music books. So that is why I read Bach, Music in the Castle of Heaven by John Eliot Gardiner. I checked this out from my library because the cover is really pretty. It's an 800-page Bach biography. I've never sung any Bach. I don't know anything. Well, I didn't know anything about the guy, but the cover is so pretty, so I read it. John Eliot Gardiner is a very famous conductor. He is known as one of the best modern interpreters of Baroque music. It's just a biography, but it's a biography about a person who was kind of very famously uninteresting. He didn't have much going on in his life. He was a very private person, and we, to this day, don't know a lot of his inner thoughts about his work or his process or his faith. And instead, all we have is the music. And so John Eliot Gardiner talks about the ways that Bach revolutionized music and uses those as a portrait of the man himself. And like, what does somebody composing this music in this place at this time mean about them as a person? And it's just so cool to see like his craft and his faith and his work ethic like intersecting to create these very formulaic writings, but also just these works of brilliance. It taught me about a lot of music that I have heard but didn't like know anything about. So I'm grateful for that. I am currently a student in a classical music school. I almost said conservatory. It's a university. But I am surrounded by a lot of instrumentalists who know a lot about classical composers. And I am a singer who kind of became a singer on accident. I was mostly an actor in high school. Now I am an opera singer. So I'm like catching up on the classical music game pretty late. And we're not required to take a music history class for our degree until pretty late in the game. And I just think that books like this, which help me contextualize who these composers were and what their works meant for the time period, that allows me to just care a little bit more about the canon. This book is very interesting, but it's pretty dry. John Eliot Gardiner is very clearly more of a musician than a writer. And it was interesting to me that this book is marketed as just like a mass media, like popular nonfiction book when the level of like technical musical knowledge required to get through it is more intense than I was expecting. It kind of read like a doctoral thesis that had just been published and sold in Barnes & Noble somehow. But still, very good book. Then I've just read so many plays. So next is Passover by Antoinette Nwandu. This is kind of an adaptation of Waiting for Godot. It is about two black men named Moses and Kitch who are waiting on a street corner hoping to pass over and escape their social and economic class and to find a new, better life for themselves. It's a lot like Waiting for Godot. It's got some very playful language and powerful writing. I'm going to say this about all of these plays, but I really want to see it on stage. After that, I read Mr. Burns, a post-electric play by Anne Washburn. I've known about this for years, but just this last week I've realized that I have a Scribd subscription and I can read all of these plays that I've been thinking about. So this one is a post-apocalyptic play about a group of survivors sitting around a fire trying to remember an episode of The Simpsons from memory. That's Act 1. Act 2, they have remembered the episode and they are now a traveling theater troupe who goes around and performs episodes of The Simpsons. Act 3 is set 70 years later when this Simpsons episode has become like a folk tale and there's a brand new like a musical adaptation of it. And it's just a trip to read, and I bet seeing it on stage would be just the most surreal, out-of-body experience. It's very funny also because they're sitting around and they're talking about The Simpsons, but then, like, they'll bring out their guns, and it's just a full, like, Walking Dead post-apocalypse story. Then I read White Card by Claudia Rankine. I found out that she writes plays. This one is about a young black artist who is invited to dinner at the house of a white art collector who is hoping to curate her works for an exhibit on racial trauma in America. The play discusses the shortcomings of white activism and the consumption of black trauma as entertainment. And it also unpacks this very interesting take on white supremacy as family loyalty, Because a lot of white people, of course, don't think of themselves as having any, like, investment in white supremacy or the continuation of it, but they do have a loyalty to their families. And there is this situation in which you try to create a world which is better for your children, and you pass on what you can to your children. And that's just a very interesting conversation about how white supremacy perpetuates itself unconsciously as well as consciously. Then I read Galatea by Madeline Miller. This is not a play. This is a short story, which I have been wanting to read for years, but it's not published in the US, so I had to find it on Scribd. And this is about a woman who was brought to life from stone. She started as a statue, and the artist who sculpted her... My phone keeps running out of storage. I'm going to try and wrap this up fast. Galatea is good. It's about a woman grappling with the fact that she is now alive, and she is being controlled by a man who fell in love with her when she couldn't move or speak. I also read Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus by Taylor Mack. This play follows up where the Shakespeare play Titus Andronicus leaves off, where there's a coup overthrowing the empire, there's just bodies everywhere, and it's about a clown who is hired as a maid to clean up the dead bodies. And he and the actual maid are butting heads on the best way to deal with the situation. And I thought it was really fun and messy. Taylor Mack is a playwright known for kind of pushing boundaries. I think writing-wise, it's kind of messy just because it doesn't seem like it ever decides what the, like, message is. You have one character arguing that, like, you can't leave messes because then the people who made the mess will just keep making the messes. And then another character who is like, you can't keep cleaning up after terrible people, because by creating a clean, orderly environment in the midst of chaos, you're sending the message that, like, the carnage is okay, and it's not okay, and you can't keep pretending that it's okay, and instead we should use the mess that we are given and transform it into something new and exciting and beautiful. And I think a lot of the charm of the play comes from that messiness. Then I read Schoolgirls, the African Mean Girls play by Jocelyn Biot. This is about a group of black girls at a boarding school in Ghana, hoping to compete in the Miss Ghana pageant. And it talks about how that situation is disrupted when a biracial girl from America moves to their town and comes to the school and hopes to join the pageant as well. This play is extremely good. It's funny, it's exciting, powerful, and this is another one that I have wanted to read and see for a long time, so I'm glad that I found it on paper. Now I just need to see a production of it. And that is the last thing that I have finished. Now I'm going to show you what I am reading currently. Up first is A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This has been recommended to me left and right for a long time now. It won the Pulitzer, and it's about some people working in the music industry. I was very excited because chapter 1 was extremely good. It was just about a woman in a restaurant who, like, steals a lady's wallet, and it was really exciting. And I want to read more about her, but every chapter is about a different person, and it's been like 100 pages, and these other people's stories are fine. I want her back. Then I've read some of All About Love by Bell Hooks. This is the first thing I've read by Bell Hooks, and it's a bunch of essays about love. I still want to read some Bell Hooks. I just don't think this is for me. It's very gendered. It kind of reads as like a self-help book for straight women, which is fine. It's just not for me. Not everything needs to be. Then I have We Do This Till We Free Us, which is abolitionist essays by Mariame Kaba. These are advocating for police and prison abolition and the complete rebuilding of the American justice system. And they're extremely good. They go beyond what most abolitionist writing I have read so far does, which is just like say that police and prisons are bad, which is like, great, what now? These actually give an idea for what the future could be, and it emphasizes that abolition isn't just the destruction of our current society, but it is a very hopeful vision for the society that we can build. And this book also leads you to resources for community organizing and activism, and it is extremely good. I recommend this to everybody. Okay, now I have a big pile of books that I want to read this summer, but I don't know if I'm going to read any of these. First on this pile, I have 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I didn't like this that much when I tried reading it the first time. I got through the first third, but reading Absolutely on Music has brought me back to Murakami, so I think maybe I will try and finish the last 2/3 of this at some point. I have Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. There's an essay competition that I want to enter for the chance to win a lot of money, so I have to read this to do that. I have The Wind's 12 Quarters, which is a short story collection by Ursula K. Le Guin. These are all sci-fi, and it's got one in here that I've been looking for a long time, which is The Ones Who Walk from Omelas, which is about a utopian society whose survival depends on the torture of a single child. I also have a short story by Toni Morrison, Recitatif. This is her only short story that she ever published, and it has just come out in this brand new edition, and it's beautiful. I think that I will read this after I finish her other novels, so I've still got to read Tar Baby and The Bluest Eye. Then I have these Gabriel Garcia Marquez books in front of me, 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera. I haven't had a ton of success with Marquez, but these are two of the heavy hitters. So I'll try one of them this summer. And then the last thing in this pile is this translation of the Aeneid by Virgil. It's translated by Shady Barch. I don't know. I always want to read like Greek and Roman stuff in the summer, so I've got this copy. It's beautiful. And that's everything. I'll stop talking. I have way too much video to edit now. Thank you for watching along. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up, and comment down below your thoughts on any of the books I have mentioned. Tell me what you're reading this year, what you're reading this summer. And if you're new here, subscribe. Join us. Thank you. Good night. Goodbye.